My name is Chad Workman. I'm an assistant strength and conditioning coach here at UNC. I want to thank Nate, obviously, for organizing such a high-level event and obviously getting so many awesome professionals in one place. And I'd like to officially, obviously, welcome you to our facility as well. So thank you guys for coming out tonight. Full disclosure, I am not an expert on plyometrics. I will say that. Current point in my career, I've been working with field sports, and you can label that however you want to: lacrosse, soccer, field hockey, baseball. I guess you could throw those in there. Softball. I've been doing that for about the last 8 years now. So having said that, what I'm going to talk to you about is kind of my experiences and things that I've done that have worked, and hopefully you can apply some of those things later as well. We'll go over some generalized concepts of why we should do this. We'll talk about what are some examples of how we can implement this, but also we'll talk about not necessarily progression, so to speak, but just some general ideas. Here's some exercises that I've tried, and more specifically, what I found very difficult with field sports is where, when, and how are you doing this within the collegiate context. Some of you guys obviously are in a different kind of setting at this point, but hopefully this stuff can apply for you as well. Look at this. Nice. Okay, so general overview, we'll talk about a few things. Number one, what I think is the beauty and the challenge of working with Olympic sports, working with field sports specifically. We'll talk about this idea of Pareto's principle. You guys also probably seen this called the 80-20 rule. We'll go through a brief literature review, some things that I looked at and I found just in the last couple of weeks. A bridge concept, something that I will say is original. I came up with that myself, but taking it from other people. Practical applications, and then some special considerations as far as applying these to other sports. So, the biggest challenge, in my opinion, when it comes to, and by the way, I'm going to use notes, I'm sorry for everybody. The biggest challenge when it comes to training field sport athletes, I would say, is the broad demand of physical activities necessary, physical prerequisites necessary to perform at the sport. So, for example, you take a soccer athlete. They've got to be able to play and thrive and do very well for 90 minutes. They also have to be able to beat that guy to the ball in front of them. They also have to be able to jump higher than the guy who's also going for the ball. So we look at that from a power capacity continuum. They have to be able to operate on all ends. So that means from a training perspective for us, we can't just live on the endurance piece, even though it's very important. We can't just live on the strength and power piece, even though it's very important. So it comes down to this question of how do we incorporate all these things? How do we put it together to be able to deliver a high-level performance? So that comes down to Pareto's principle. I actually used to just call this the 80-20 rule. When I Googled 80-20, this is what came up. So it's Italian guys, last name's Pareto. It's this general idea that whenever you look at a lot of different things in the world, a natural phenomenon is that 80% of the outcomes come from 20% of the inputs. That makes a lot of sense to me from a strength training program. So for example, if we said, I want to make you really, really strong. Somebody comes up to me and says, I want to get really, really strong. And I say, how much time do you have to train? They say 10 hours. Great. We got all the time in the world. So let's figure out all the fun stuff we can do with that. Right? So you can do whatever concept, however many special exercises that fit into that mold, depending on the person's level. But now you flip that around. Let's say somebody comes up to you and says, I want to get really, really strong. How much time do you have? I got 30 minutes a week to train. So I'll ask you, what would you do with that person for that 30 minutes? What is going to be the 20% of the input that is going to give you 80% of your results? You're probably going to say things like heavy deadlifts, heavy squats, heavy presses, pull-ups, things along those lines. And you'll go after that for the next 30 minutes, come back and do it again. To me, whenever I look at what are the restrictions that we have with most of our field sports, that's what I start to think about. Because in a lot of cases, let's say you work with a soccer or a field hockey or lacrosse or something along those lines, they play year-round. They practice year-round. Oftentimes, you won't get a lot of time with them. You might get 2 hours a week in the weight room if you're lucky. You might get 30 minutes on the field once or twice a week. So we say we've got to get our capacity training done somehow. We've got to get our strength training done somehow. And we've got to get all of our other cool speed and agility pieces done as well. So I say all of that to kind of move into our next slide and talk about why do plyometrics fit into that 20% that we've got to cram into our couple hours a week that we get to help a field sport performer. So why? I'll give you a few points. Looking through some of the literature, one of the biggest things that comes up is that power wins games. Whenever you look at most team sports, you'll see at each subsequent level, going from youth to amateur to sub-elite to elite, across the averages, each level tends to get more powerful. Meaning if you look at vertical jump heights on average across those teams, they go higher and higher and higher and higher. And that's been shown in several different sports at several different levels, men and women, as you progress up. So having said that, when I look at an athlete, I say, if I can get your team, or I talk to a coach, if I can get your team to be a little bit more powerful, however you want to measure that, I can increase your chance of reaching another level of performance. So yeah, we can be more powerful. We increase our chance of success. Plyometrics can increase sprint, jump, and agility performances. More specifically, vector-specific or direction-specific plyometrics have specific carryovers to certain tasks. Meaning vertical jump typically helps people jump vertically higher. Horizontal jumps help people with horizontal jumps and sprint technique. Multi-directional jumps tend to help people with agility tasks. So when you think about how can I incorporate this in a program, one of the first things that pops in my mind is we don't just need to jump up and down or front to back. We need to use all of those, because in a field sport athlete, we need to be able to express all of that in several different ways and utilize that on the field. Another thing that's really interesting is that plyometrics and strength, plyometric training and strength training, seem to work better when put together than with either one alone. A few studies I found showed that if people did strength training, they tended to increase power output really well. If they did plyometric training, they also increased power output. When they did the two concurrently, it went up even higher. Kind of talking about how we look at our strength prerequisites. Why should we try to get stronger? But they work really well together, which is great news if you talk about working with a field sport, considering you're probably only going to get about 30 to 40 minutes a day, maybe a couple 1-hour sessions a week. So it's really hard to say, let's go do our 30-minute plyometric program, then we'll go over here and do our 1-hour strength training session. You're probably going to have to do them concurrently. And the other part that becomes challenging is when you look at your seasons. Because you're not going to have a really long extended period of time to do a really drawn out progression to where we spend 6 months strength training and then 6 months doing plyometrics. You might get 6-month off season. But in that off season, they're also going to compete for half of that time. And then they're going to go home. So you might only get a solid 6 to 8 weeks. So at which point, you are going to have to make sure you are making most of your time. Plyometric programs seem to decrease ACL risk in female athletes. And that sounds like a bold statement, but when progressed correctly, they can have a preventative effect. So if you go through your postural progressions, if you make sure that your things look good biomechanically, and you progress them appropriately, they can have a preventative effect. On top of that, you also will see that landing strategies can also be predictive. So that's good news for us, meaning if we can coach them to do things better, they get hurt less often. So here's our case. If we do a good plyometrics program, we can run faster, jump higher. We'll give our team a greater chance of success, and we'll decrease injury risk. So there's my case for saying why this should be in our 20%. Building a bridge. And I said before, this is kind of an original concept. Whenever I explain to a student athlete, for example, I was talking to our field hockey team last week, and I asked them specifically, why do you think we're doing jump exercises? You don't leave the ground in the sport, so why can we do that? It's an opportunity for us to bridge strength and power training we're going to get from the weight room into sport-specific play. Meaning, it is that middle ground of looking at sport as an acceleration or deceleration on 2 feet or 1 foot in multiple directions at different speeds with different power outputs. That to me can sum up and holistically say that's probably most of what's going to happen from a sporting activity. The good news is we can break that down to some fundamental pieces and rehearse that and practice it in training. Meaning, if I'm going to cut off 2 feet, I just cut off 2 feet. Now, what did that look like? I can coach you and isolate that position now. I have to cut off 1 foot and stabilize. What did that look like? I can coach you and progress it now. Now, if you want to make you really, really fast and explosive, you've made those simple lower progressions look great. Let's make that bigger and a little bit faster out of that position. So it's a really good way to bridge any of those movements that might occur in sport and get a good carryover onto field performance. So if you look down at the handout, hopefully everybody got one. A lot of people showed up, which is awesome, but I didn't print out enough. I apologize. If you look down at the handout, there's a quick little table there of a few different progressions, and we'll kind of walk through that stuff now. But what I want to talk about now are some general practical applications, how we can put some of this stuff together. And so what we just saw were some really smart, really good ways to progress some jumping-based exercises. But having said that, I've got a couple of videos for everybody can see. Just looking at some simple ways early off-season to organize and teach some landing mechanics bilaterally, unilaterally. These are some things you can do on the field with a field sport and coach them on the fly as you go. This was actually done pre-practice last week. This was the first time they saw this stuff, so please be gentle in your judgments. But having said that, we can put it all together, do it pre-practice, get some simple organization, and progress it appropriately. As we move towards the middle of off season, we can progress into some more challenging exercises. So start looking at shorter ground contact times, being a little bit more elastic out of those positions. We can look at, perhaps we could add some sort of load to this, not necessarily in our really advanced loaded squat jumps, really explosive plyometric activities, but can we add resistance now to the concentric phase, require you to produce more force, and also resistance to the eccentric phase, require you to reduce more force. We can also kind of add some multi-directional pieces to this. So can you move more than just front to back or side to side? So as we progress along with field sports, we can start to add new physical challenges. Looking at being able to continue to build that bridge as we move towards sport-specific performances. And then as we move forward, some practical applications for late off season. And just like you just saw, these are some kind of advanced progressions looking at can you move through some specific planes of movement. And I'll say this, I didn't have any videos of training, of team training for this because I don't usually apply these things that frequently. In fact, I brought one of our better jumping kids in today just to shoot these really quickly so we can put these up there. But having said that, now you can start taking some of these progressions, make them a little bit bigger, greater magnitude, cover more ground. You can make them shorter response in a reactive directional way, or you can progress into some multi-directional bounding, being able to really create force and reduce force on a single leg, something along those lines. So, other considerations. When you start to look at gender-specific applications, what I don't think is we need to set apart, these are the exercises for the girls, these are the exercises for the guys. What I think we can do is get a better understanding. If females have a greater risk, perhaps they need some more specific progressions, more lower level progressions to teach those particular positions, maybe doing a little bit more unilateral activities to make sure that they can handle those positions. Maybe for the guys, we all know guys tend to have a little bit more strength, so they could start a little bit further along in a plyometrics progression. Maybe they don't have to take as much time progressing forward. Perhaps they can get further through the progression faster, spend more time at some more high yield exercises for them. So how? And this is kind of the cool part, what I find, again, a huge challenge working with a field sport is how are we going to apply this? And what you just saw, I think a great idea for all of us, if you're working with a field sport, or if, like a lot of us do, have challenges with sport coaches, especially with finding time to do things with their athletes. What I do is go out to the field, and I will introduce some of these things on the back end of a warm-up, particularly in the off-season. We can spend a little bit more time doing those things. We can supplement them in the weight room, do those on the front end of a strength training session as a good warm-up, a good potentiation effect. Or, as we move into our in-season periods, it's great to, again, put that in a pre-practice warm-up where you do a couple of different variations, 2 feet, unilateral, add in some multi-directional stuff. Do a couple of sets of that where it'll fit in nicely and you can still retain that training effect throughout a season. Thank you guys. Anybody have any questions?